Let us remember that although death has separated us physically, love binds us eternally. Today we pause to reflect on a man whose light-hearted, generous spirit touched hearts and shaped the lives of his family and legions of friends. May the lighting of this candle be a reminder of memories and experiences shared, and a brief representation of the everlasting impact he had on so many lives. John was a remarkable and unforgettable soul in the world and in his family. We light a candle today in the spirit of hope. As we remember and honor John, we begin our work as mourners. We cherish images of countless memorable and sweet times with John, a kid brother, a brother-in-law, an uncle, a husband, a father and father-in-law, a friend and neighbor, a golfing buddy, a beloved. And we acknowledge in this place and time that our own spark, our own light has dimmed and flickers uncertainly. So we light this candle today to carry its light in our hearts and to companion us in the darkness. Today we tend to our individual needs and the needs of family and community. We seek to simultaneously remember a loved one and care for ourselves and one another so that we can carry John's spirit and hope along with our own light back into the world when we leave this place. Welcome, family and friends. Thank you for joining us in this sacred place, a place made sacred by our gathering and by our purpose today on this beautiful spring morning in Colorado. As we begin our tribute today, please silence your cell phones if you have not already done so. Thank you for helping us focus our attention and our intention on celebrating John's life. My name is Lynn Cressy. I'm a Dignity Memorial celebrant. I was privileged to spend time on Zoom several weeks ago visiting with John's beloved family, his wife Cheryl, sons Scott and Joe, daughter-in-law Heather, and brother Rick, about John's legacy and life and the impact he had on their lives. We all benefit from their open-heartedness, generosity, thoughtfulness, and their hard work in creating this memorial service for us. I'm honored to be here with you celebrating your loved one, a good man and a good friend, a man who loved life, his family, and golf. I know John was a good man. He left behind a good family who loved him like crazy and miss him profoundly. Friends and family join us today from all over the country. Cheryl and Scott and his wife Heather live here in Denver. His son Joe and his partner Joseph live in Silverthorne. His sister and brother-in-law Barbara and George Hegarty are here from Hawaii, and his brother Eric, whom the family calls Rick, and his sister-in-law Susie have traveled from Texas. Friends and family are also here from Alaska, Ohio, Michigan, and Florida. I invite all of us to set aside the cares and concerns of the world and enter fully into this sacred time and space in a spirit of love and remembrance. We gather to honor, to remember, to sink into the embrace of family and friends who share a common heritage and memories and a bond of love for John, for his family, and for one another. William Shakespeare wrote these profound words about grief. Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak knits up the o'erwrought heart and bids it break. We come today to celebrate John and his legacy. We come to tell stories about John, and we're here to give sorrow words. We begin our tribute today with the song Yesterday, recorded by the Beatles. It's a song of John's generation, and it was chosen by Cheryl in loving memory of John. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away, and now it seems as if they're here to stay. How I long for yesterday. These words are a powerful expression of the depth of grief left in the wake of John's death. The 12th century poet Judah Halevi wrote these haunting words about love. "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch. To love, to hope, to dream, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this love, but a holy thing to love what death can touch." The 12th century poet Dr. Seuss wrote, "Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened." So here we are today, expressing emotions across the spectrum. Deep grief over the loss of such a kind and generous man as John Korth, and grateful because he graced the lives of family and friends, and always, always brought fun along for the ride. Ironic, isn't it? Love makes us so happy, and then it breaks our hearts, and leaves us in grief. With your enduring support as an intimate community of family and friends who love and adore John, we're here to celebrate the full arc of his life. We begin at the end of John's story with the events that ultimately brought us to this time and space, shared by John's son, Joe.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you to everyone that's here with us today, both in person and I know there's many of you here virtually. We really appreciate you guys. I've been looking out at you today. It's a beautiful group of people we have here that all loved my dad deeply and that he loved in return. This has been an immensely challenging time for everyone, and I don't know how we could have done it without you. I personally will never forget all the love and support we received, and forever grateful to everyone who helped us and my dad through his illness. For those of you that don't know me or perhaps don't recognize me after a long time, I'm Joe Korth, and I was lucky enough to be John's son. My brother Scott will be talking more about our memories of him as a father a bit later, but he was an amazing person, and we were both extremely fortunate to have him in our lives. I think we won the dad lottery somehow, and that makes it that much more difficult that he's not here with us today. The fact that he's as deeply missed as he is testament to what an amazing person he was. And through all of this, as painful as it's been for me, I've been always aware that it's a gift to have it hurt this much, because he was that great of a person. It's a daunting task for me to talk about him, as there truly are not words to describe what a good-natured, genuine, easygoing, and likable person he was. Those are the words that really describe him best for me. If there's one word, just good-natured is who he was. Like, he never wished anybody anything bad, and there's not many people in the world like that. The good news for me is that I don't really need to tell you how amazing he was, as you all had the good fortune to know him and love him. And I know that he loved you all deeply in return. You didn't need to spend much more than about 10 minutes with him to know his character. He was so completely authentic and straightforward, and I think that's one of the things that made him so universally loved. You never needed to look between the lines with him. What you saw was what you got. He was deeply himself, and that's one of the many lessons that I try to carry with me in my own life and to practice. Our immediate family was with him in this journey from the day he first got sick to the very end. I'm extremely proud of how present we were during everything. There were times that were incredibly difficult, and through it all, we managed to take the next right step and tackle whatever was in front of us, always with my dad's well-being and health as the only priority. Due to COVID, of course, I believe many of you weren't able to share in his journey as closely as you would have in normal times. And I'm sure his death is even more difficult to comprehend given this circumstance. I know for myself, walking in here today and having all the family here, it's surreal. It's still just hard to believe that he's not here with us. And for those of you that weren't there day in and day out, I think it's even that much harder to appreciate what happened. I was very involved in his medical care from the very beginning, and the family wanted me to tell you a bit about what happened, that it will perhaps help in understanding and provide closure in his passing. It is, I believe, a year to the day that he first went into the hospital in Florida. I'll never forget that night. My mom called me to tell me something was wrong. My dad was unable to have a rational conversation, and he was very confused and incoherent. We thought he was having a stroke. So she called 911, and he was rushed off to the hospital. That was the first of many, many trips he had to take to the hospital. The doctors in Florida discovered a mass in his kidney. After weeks of testing and in and out of the hospital, the local hospital there was unable to give us any explanation for what was going on, and he continued to deteriorate physically and mentally during that time. So with the help of family and friends, we were able to get him transferred to the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. Even there, at one of the very best hospitals in the United States, it took them 10 days to figure out what was going on, and countless tests. And it was extremely difficult, but they eventually were able to diagnose him with lymphoma. He had a particularly aggressive type of lymphoma, and it had spread widely by the time that they diagnosed his condition. One of the most difficult parts for all of this and the many, many days that he spent in the hospital afterwards is that due to COVID, we were unable to visit him. The restrictions didn't allow for any visitation, and that thing certainly made things much harder for the family and for my dad. When they did finally make the lymphoma diagnosis, they did allow my mom and I to go see him in the hospital. It had been weeks since we had seen him, and those were some of the most difficult days, certainly, of my life and of our lives. Seeing him was a shock. He'd lost a ton of weight. He'd been bedridden for weeks and hadn't shaved. In some ways, the distance that COVID created was maybe good, that people didn't see him in that type of condition. I think it's really nice in some ways that we can remember him as he is on this table, of happy and smiling and full of life. And that's how I choose to remember him, although I certainly will never forget the last year. They started chemotherapy the next day, and miraculously he improved incredibly quickly, and the chemotherapy was extremely effective. I think he was released a week later, and seeing him go from on his deathbed to back to some type of normalcy was a miracle. My parents decided to put my dad's medical care as the highest priority in their life, and spent the next 4 months there in Cleveland to see his chemotherapy through to its conclusion. He walked through the countless doctors and hospital visits with amazing courage and fortitude. He hardly ever complained about any of it. He was very fortunate to have a relatively easy time through his chemotherapy, at least at that time. There certainly were serious and difficult bumps along the way, but overall he tolerated everything well and was returned in many ways to the person we all knew and loved. My brother and I were both able to spend a lot of time with my parents while they were in Cleveland. That was one of the gifts through all of this, which there were many. But one of them was that we got to spend so much time together. I saw my mom and dad more last year than I had probably in the 5 years combined before that. And I'm really grateful that we had all that time together. My dad had been through a lot, but he continued to feel better. We all got to celebrate his 69th birthday together there in Cleveland, and it was one of the nicest times we had together as a family that I can remember. If there was any question as to whether John was my dad, all they needed to do was to come to the kitchen at about 2 a.m. And there would be me and my dad having run into each other in the middle of the night, both evidently having the midnight snacking gene. He was fond of eating apples in the middle of the night, and I was always looking for sweets. We would always share a few minutes there, talking before going back to bed. Eventually, after his chemotherapy finished, they did a final body scan. I know we were all very nervous at that time about the results. It was a wonderful day when they told us that he was cancer-free. I know he had been longing to go back to Florida and resume some type of normal life, and this was the good news we had all been waiting for. My parents went back to Florida with a ton of help, particularly from my brother and sister-in-law. My dad was still very frail and needed help getting around. Over the next couple of months, it became apparent that the chemotherapy had caused significant nerve damage. During this time, he lost almost all the function in his right hand. This affected his life greatly, as you can imagine, and you could tell he was struggling with it. We all know that the word golf is synonymous with John Korth, and I'm sure that the idea he may never be able to play golf again was there in his mind. We all went down for Christmas and were able to spend a really nice week together. I'm really, again, grateful that even though the chemotherapy and treatment didn't cure his cancer, it gave us 6 or 9 months to all spend together that maybe wouldn't have had otherwise. So that was a huge gift, and spending another Christmas together was really special. But he wasn't quite himself. Some of the light had gone out of him, primarily, I think, because of his struggling with his loss of his arm. I think we were all hopeful, though, that it would continue to heal and he would continue to improve. Not long after that Christmas, my dad was readmitted to the hospital for difficulty breathing. This was a very scary thing, as we had all been extremely conscientious with COVID, and it would have been horribly tragic if he had gotten COVID after all of that struggle through the cancer. But they eventually found his cancer had come back. I think we had all known this was possible, but none of us remotely expected it would have been that quickly. Again, things progressed very rapidly. I flew in and was able to spend a day with him at home, but he was in bad shape. And once evening rolled around, we needed to call 911 again due to his breathing difficulties, which were a result of fluid buildup around his lungs. Once again, through monumental effort, we were able to get him transferred to the Cleveland Clinic there in Florida in order to try and get him the best care possible. Due to the cancer, he was once again greatly mentally affected, and so the family was in charge of medical discussions. And through those discussions with many doctors, we were eventually decided to make the extremely difficult decision to begin palliative care. By and large, like I said, he had not suffered greatly during all of his cancer with physical pain and suffering. But when we were able to see him at the hospital, we could see he was suffering. And we also knew that the chance of him finding any long-term recovery from the cancer was extraordinarily small. We all knew him well enough to know that he didn't want to live in a hospital. He'd done that for 6 months, and he was done with it. And he was also someone that really wanted to live life fully and his way, and when his time came, he was ready to go. And that I had talked to him about that, and I knew that was how he was he wanted to do it completely and fully and enjoy his life, and when it was time, he was okay. It's an incredible gift that all of us were able to spend that last time with him. We were able to tell him how much we loved him and how much we'd miss him, and try and make him as comfortable as possible. I'm forever grateful to my cousin Mandy for being there with us during that really difficult time. I didn't realize before then how impactful it can be to just be physically present for someone. You don't need to say anything or do anything much. Just having a person there was so important. I'll never forget that. He passed comfortably, surrounded by all of us that loved him so very deeply. I will miss him for the rest of my life, as I know we all will. I will never forget any of that. But the more important thing, and I know my dad would agree, is to remember him as that happy, smiling person that you can see in all these photos up here. As the dad that taught me how to ski and how to be kind towards others, and took me to my Little League games, and accepted me how I was, the eccentricities and all. I will cherish the many happy memories I have with him, both from my childhood and as an adult. One very special thing that happened before COVID and before my dad got sick was that the whole family was able to take a trip to New York City together. My mom and I both celebrated significant birthdays in 2019, and so we decided to celebrate all together as a family. We got to share in some wonderful meals and go to the symphony and to the museums, and my parents took the ferry out to see the Statue of Liberty. I didn't appreciate at the time how special that trip was. I know we all expected there would be more times like that in our future. We were even vaguely discussing doing another trip for my dad's 70th birthday. In the end, that wouldn't be possible, but we did get the good fortune to share that wonderful trip all together, and that was just really special and beautiful. As much as losing my dad hurts, I am still filled with gratitude and feel incredibly lucky that I had such a beautiful and loving person for my father.
Thank you, Joe, for sharing your beautiful words of family and love and most of all, gratitude. Finding gratitude in that journey is an amazing thing. I'm honored to go back to the beginning, to tell the beautiful story of an amazing life. Thank you, Joe, and Rick's going to help, and then Scott. So we're going to just tell an entire story here today. John's parents, Geraldine, Jerry, Wilson Korth, and Howard Hutch Korth, were native Michiganders. They actually grew up within a few miles of each other, Jerry in Bay City and Hutch in Saginaw. Hutch served in the Navy during World War II. Hutch and Jerry married in 1943 and relocated to Florida, where Hutch was employed by the airline industry to raise their family. John, the youngest of 4 children, was born in Miami Springs, Florida, on August 6, 1951. Hutch traveled to Point Lookout, Michigan, and was very attracted to the charm of Point Lookout, a community where everyone knew everyone. He began looking for a family cottage. The family rented for several summers and ultimately purchased the Korth cottage in 1957. Over the years, extended family members have joined the Korths at Point Lookout. During the week, it was a neighborhood full of kids. To quote Rick, there was a tremendous amount of kids swimming in Saginaw Bay, learning to sail from their moms, from their friends, playing on the baseball team. It was a different time then, and kids were free range. Not so much these days. What wonderful, lovely, long summer days spent out of the house until dinner time. Back in Miami for the school year, the Korth children attended Catholic school. Not particularly known for studying, John was much more inclined to be out riding bikes with his buddies in the neighborhood. He enjoyed spending time in the neighbors' pools. They rode their bikes to school 2.5 miles most days. The Korth property was spacious, and every year after the neighbors dismantled and discarded their Christmas trees, the kids, including John's big sister Barb, would drag 30 or 40 trees home to build forts in the backyard to hang out in. John's brother Rick has more stories to share about growing up with John. Do you want to use this one, or are you going to bring your own?
Okay, as I look out at our gathering here today, I see a lot of mixed faces in there. Some smiles, some very concerned faces, a lot of different expressions. I know the same thing is probably happening in all our virtual people that are watching here today. But I want to take a moment and I want you all to just think of one thing. Picture John in your mind. What do you see? I think we all can see that big smile of his. We look at this table over here, every picture that he's in here, he's got that big smile on. He always had the big smile. So now that we're all smiling, let me tell you some stories about my brother John as we were kind of growing up. First off, John had 4 names growing up. There was his formal name, John. Mom called him Lovey because he was so cute and cuddly, and so that's why he was Lovey. Tim turned around and named him Grubby. John always seemed to be dirty. He'd play hard. He'd have stuff on his face everywhere, which way. And then over the years, most of you knew him as Johnny, especially the Point Lookout crowd. So over time, John became Johnny. Grubby became Grub. Lovey seemed to drop by the wayside. And every time I said I had to go to the John, I got blasted by that guy with all the names. You're not going there. Okay, when we were 4 and 6, John was 4 and I was 6, we lived on Curtis Parkway in Miami Springs, Florida. We were in a small bedroom, and we had 2 sets of bunk beds in there. I was in the upper right bunk bed, and across the room, which was about this much space, John was in the lower bunk bed. I apologize to Barb here because Barb informed me that she was part of the bunk bed crowd as well as Tim, but all I remember is John and myself on this particular incident. I gave John one rule. I said, John, you do not go to sleep until you see your brother Rick go to sleep first. Okay, I was a scaredy cat. John didn't know what the difference was. John broke the big rule one night. I reached out with one of my favorite stuffed animals, and I blasted him down on his table. He gave out this howl out there, just screaming. Mom and Dad come roaring in there. Mom goes immediately to John, gives him all this loving. Dad turns around and gives me the look. He knew that somehow I was doing it. John won that battle that day. I never again pulled that stunt. Then older brother Tim, he always wanted to play stickball. And stickball to Tim means that you played with a shaved, incredibly fast tennis ball and a broomstick. And it's not like the tennis ball that you play tennis with. This thing would really hum. And so the problem is, I wanted to play, Tim wanted to play, we needed a catcher. So we turned around to John, and we kind of coerced, bullied him into being the catcher. Then what would happen is that when Tim would pitch, I would bat. And when I would pitch, Tim would bat. John was just the catcher. John never batted, right? And we said, well, John, you got to be tough being a catcher. And we pushed him for the toughness because you didn't wear a face mask. You didn't have any covering. That ball, when Tim threw it, came in there about 3,000 miles an hour. So John was getting blasted all the time. After a couple of weeks, John figured out he didn't want to be tough anymore. He didn't want to be a catcher anymore. And so he was going to leave the party. And so we ended up talking about it, and somehow or another, John came to this compromise that when Tim would pitch, I would bat, and every other time, John would bat. And then when I would pitch, Tim would bat, and every other time, John would bat. And then after a couple of weeks, Tim and I sat there and said, what the hell? And hell was a big word for us kids at that stage. But we said, what the hell? John's batting twice as much as we are. He can't even hit the damn ball. And so, but anyway, old John got the better of both Tim and I at that stage of the game. Okay, so another story back in Coral. This is in Coral Gables, Florida. We had a big trampoline. John and I had a bunch of friends. I mean, we had a neighborhood where we had a lot of kids. So I had my friends there. John had his kids there. Everybody loved to come jump on that trampoline. So we then had, every afternoon, the city bus would ride first in front of our house, turn the corner, because we lived on a corner, and then it would run right alongside the side of our house. And on the side of our house, there was, first off, where the trampoline was, there was a kumquat tree. Now, you probably don't know what kumquats are, but kumquats are little orange citrus fruit type of things, and they're pretty hefty in size, and they about the size of a ping pong ball. So we could pick all these kumquats off the kumquat tree. Also, between where the trampoline was and where the bus drove by was about a 7-foot high, thick hedge. Now, you could stand on that trampoline, and what you saw, if you're fairly tall, which none of us were, you could see the very top of the buses that went by. That was stinko. But when you started jumping on that trampoline and you had your kumquats in hand, you could see that whole side of that bus, including the open windows when the people go by. And so we would plaster all these kids all the time. One day, one of John's buddies, so we did this for, I'd say 2-3 weeks. Oh, after the first couple of days, the regulars that would ride the bus, when they made the turn, they also got into this new sport game that we were playing. Because as they made the turn, all you heard was these clicks of the windows, click, 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 click. It was an incredible amount of noise because they all blew their windows up there. But anyway, one day, one of John's buddies, unknown to the rest of us, decides to catch the bus on the way back. Now, we didn't know this until Saturday morning. This was probably on a Thursday or Friday. Saturday morning, doorbell rings, policeman standing at the front door. Dad answers the door because it's a Saturday. John and I, see the police car out front, so we hustle on down there because we want to see what the heck's going on there, right? Well, the policeman then starts talking about throwing projectiles, possibly hitting people, hurting people, damaging buses, everything else. And we start backing away. And Dad says, go up to the room, wash your face. Remember, John was grubby. Wash your face, put on some clothes, because all we had was shorts on, and wear shoes. So we did. We came back down. Next thing we know, we're heading off to the police station. We go to the police station. We get a second guy reading us the riot act. He sat at his desk. We had to stand at attention in front of his desk. He read us the riot act. Next thing I know, he gets up. He says, come with me. He walks us right back to where the jail cells are. Says, get in there. We get in there. He shuts the door and it locks. And he walks away. Well, all our bravado just went out the window. John is crying his eyes out. I'm whimpering like a baby over there. We didn't know what the heck was happening, but this was really bad. Well, they left us in that state for about 10 minutes, and then they came back, and the policeman said, you're being released to your father. That's all he said. Dad walks out. We follow Dad because we don't want to be anywhere near this jail anymore. We follow Dad. We get in the car. He doesn't say a word. We get home. He says, go up to your room. I will be up there eventually. We go up to the room. He lets us sit there for 2 hours. John didn't win that battle that day. Rick didn't win that battle that day. One thing, John and Rick bonded together, though, because we made sure that doofus friend of his never came back to our house to jump on the trampoline. Oh, P.S. There's a P.S. to that story. Paul Harvey, the rest of the story. 40 or 50 years later, I'm sitting there talking to Dad, and I bring up that incident. He says, oh, I guess I didn't tell you this detail. Remember when I told you to go upstairs, wash your face, put on some clothes, including shoes? I planned this whole thing with the policeman. He called it into his police buddy, and they just hammered us big time. But that's how that all happened. Okay, so now it's my sophomore year, and I'm spending the summer with my aunt and uncle in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. John was at bowling green down there. And we talked to each other, and we decided we need to have a trip up to Point Lookout for the weekend. You know, John was doing things, I was doing it, but we need to go to Point Lookout for the weekend. Now, John had this old car. It was an old Chevy. I think it was green in color, but there was so much rust on it, the color was kind of off type of thing. And so here's the deal. He leaves Bowling Green. He picks me up in Bloomfield Hills. Now we're screaming down the highway, 70 miles an hour. I'm trying to find music on this crummy old radio that didn't work. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, the friggin' front hood goes right up. I jumped sky high. My heart flew out of my mouth. It was just awful. John is just laughing his head off. The safety catch of the hood catches it. But you don't have that feeling when you know it's going to crash in that windshield and shatter you and everything else. So he's laughing, and he laughed. It took us about an hour for my heart just to get down to maximum rate. I mean, it was so scary. And so we finally get there, and I'm starting to needle him about it a little bit, maybe a little bit more than a needle. And he says, well, just a minute. He said, you're not the first guy this happened to. This happened to your brother, Tim. Same car, same highway, same situation. So John definitely won that one, too. He actually had a double header on that one. He got both Tim and myself on that one. So, last story. So, one summer, John and I, we both started playing golf. We didn't start playing when we were younger. We started playing when we were older. And we realized that both of us, unknown to each other, were starting to play golf together. So we put the big challenge on each other. We're up in Michigan. So we said, all right, let's go to Michigan. We're going to play a battle. We're going to have a battle between the two of us to see who's the best golfer. Oh, yeah, we're going to do this. And so we decided on the very hefty bets. We established the bets in advance. $1 to the winner for whoever got the best score on the front nine, $1 to the winner whoever got the best score on the back nine, and $1 to the winner whoever won the 18th. Now you sit there and say, that isn't much money. That wasn't much money. But here's the catch. The loser had to put You had to pay cash. You had to have the dollars before we even started battle, whichever person was going to win. The winner would put their hand out. The loser would have to put the cash from his hand to yours. That was a deal. Couldn't lay it on the table. Couldn't give it to you. Couldn't say, I'll give it to you when we get back. No, right then and there. That was the victory in the golf battle. Most of the golf that we played, it was kind of strange because it was the last 2 holes that normally settled every match that we had. Number 17, number 18. We were that close in the way we played this game. Anyway, we thoroughly loved. One thing. Every summer, we'd keep all these scorecards. And at the end of the summer, before we were splitting up, going our different ways, we'd say, all right, who is the real winner? And so we'd add up all these scorecards and everything. We tried to finagle it. Well, how about just adding all the total? No, it was who paid the cash. That's the way we settled. And so in the beginning, I was edging John out. In the beginning of years, I'm talking years now. 3 or 4 years, I was edging him out. In the middle years, 5, 7 years, we were going back and forth. One summer he'd win, one summer I'd win, one summer. And then all of a sudden we went up there and it was like the atmosphere changed. We went out and played. We always looked forward to playing with each other, but the atmosphere changed. And all of a sudden John was whipping my poor butt every time I get out there and play. And I said, what happened here? He says, well, I don't know. It had something to do with golf lessons, had something to do with driving ranges, had something to do with putting, and had something to do with being in Florida where he could play all year round. And all of a sudden, he was just nailing me all the time. We always enjoyed our battles, and we enjoyed playing with our friends, too. It was like Joe has pointed out, golf is a huge thing. My daughter and her family, when John had died, gave me a very thoughtful gift. It is a copper ball marker. It's this size, but when you're putting, you mark your green where your ball is. And it says, Golfing Heaven's Fairway, John Korth. I'll never play another round of golf without having Brother John in my mind and this coin. John, you have a wonderful family, and you always showed love and affection to Cheryl and Scott and Heather, and Joe, and Omar, and Joseph, and let's not forget Scooby. John was the only guy I know that I ever saw. We were at John and Cheryl's place in Troy, Michigan, and it was time for Scooby to eat. They'd fill up his bowl. John would sit, there was a step down from the kitchen area down to the living room, and he'd sit there, and he'd have this bowl, and he would hand feed Scooby the whole bowl. Who else did that? I said, what is this, a special occasion? He said, oh, Scooby won't eat it unless I hand feed him. So John has given huge amounts of time to the family, more so than probably most fathers can possibly do, because it was just the way it all worked out. And he was able to guide them very clearly through their life and all their social gatherings. He nurtured them great as a family. In behalf of Barb and myself, we're the only 2 that are left. We will stay involved with you, Cheryl, and Joe, and Scott, and families. And we'll give you any type of support and love we can. John was a wonderful person. I love my brother John and all his names. I took great joy when I was trying to figure out what I was going to say in going down this memory lane with Brother John. And by extension, my brother Tim, my sister Barb, all these memories that we went through. Thank you all for taking the time to listen. And John, one more time, give us one of your big award-winning smiles so that we can all walk away from this. And may the good Lord bless you and all your family. Amen.
Thanks, Rick, for sharing your stories of your adventures with your brothers, with your family. Thanks for taking us along for your trip down memory lane. Cheryl Bowden's family went to their cottage on Saginaw Bay every weekend. Cheryl and John met during one of those weekends when she drove over to Point Lookout to visit friends. That was the beginning of a relationship that would endure for the rest of John's life. Hutch's work transferred him and the family to the Bay Area in California just in time for John's senior year of high school. That was a difficult time for John. I understand that he used stronger language. He struggled being away from his lifelong friends. He used his allowance, and it was a shock to Rick to find out that John actually had an allowance. What's up with that? He used his allowance to buy clothes and school supplies and to use a payphone. Remember payphones? In the neighborhood to call Cheryl in Michigan. His long-distance relationship with Cheryl was helpful to him in making it through that difficult time in his senior year of high school in Piedmont. He graduated in 1969 and attended Bowling Green State University in Ohio and courted his future wife, Cheryl. They married in 1972. She joined him at Bowling Green for his last semester of college. He graduated in December 1972 with a bachelor's degree in business. John got a job with the airlines, and Cheryl and John drove to California after graduation. It was a memorable 7-day drive across the country on Interstate 80. They rented an apartment for several years and bought a home in 1974. Their sons, Scott and Joe, were born in Berkeley, California. In 1979, John ventured out on his own in the field of financial investing and began working from home. That marked a significant change in his life and in the life of his family. John was home for dinner every evening. Cheryl says they were together every day, and they were still in love with each other. What a beautiful example and legacy of a marriage and a family. Done with work early afternoon, John was available to participate fully in his son's activities. He was a leader in the Boy Scouts and a baseball coach for many years. John and his sons went skiing in the Sierras and attended 20 or so Oakland A's games every baseball season. John loved hot dogs. In the days when we could carry our own food and beverages and coolers, even coolers, into the stadium, John had a great technique for taking his own beer into the Oakland Coliseum. He emptied the ginger ale out of those green Canada Dry bottles, filled them with beer, put the lids back on, put them in the cooler, and headed off to the game. Stadium staff, who happened to maybe or maybe not check the coolers, were none the wiser. It is not an exaggeration to say that John loved golf. He belonged to the Juniper Hills Golf Club, Huron Breeze Golf Club, and the Somerset Golf Club. A good player, he often invited people who weren't necessarily good golfers to join him for a game. He was a congenial man, and he was happy to have the companionship and the camaraderie on the golf course. He regretted not learning how to play golf earlier, so he could have enjoyed playing longer. And beating his brother, it sounds like, huh? He was also a talented tennis player, as were other members of the family. When Hutch and his boys, Tim and Rick and John, played tennis, the rule was that whoever lost most bought the beer. Sounds like those were rather competitive matches. John won a doubles tournament in Michigan 4 times. Each of those victories in a different decade of his life, beginning in his 20s. And I want to hope that you will take a few minutes in front of the memorial table. There's golf tees on the reception table. Help yourselves along with the markers. These are not just decorations. They are to be used and enjoyed. Beautiful pictures of the family. John's golf hat. Oh, he went to the Masters, huh? Been there. from the other side, there's a cemetery right next door. In April, saw the azaleas in full bloom, and a hat from Bowling Green. His family says ugliest school colors. But a worthwhile memento of treasured years. So come up and look at the pictures. In 1994, John and Cheryl left California and returned to Michigan. John was part owner of a landscaping business there in Michigan, and he used his business skills to manage the office side of the company. As much as John loved golf and tennis and spending summers in Point Lookout, his true passion was his family. More than anything else, John loved to make Cheryl happy and to see her happy. He was very present. He was a welcoming and generous parent and a wonderful role model of inclusion and acceptance. I asked if John had any favorite television shows. His family laughed and said golf was his favorite TV. He read John Grisham and Robert Ludlow books, and often said that he really got his money's worth out of a book because it took him so long to finish it. His daughter-in-law, Heather, an architect, said that the two of them shared a passion for mechanical equipment and tools. She loved hearing his stories and calls herself lucky to have known him. She said that her father-in-law was incredibly reliable and predictable. John had a daily ritual. Every day at 4 p.m., she heard him run a bath. It sounds like the walls of the condo were kind of thin. Followed by mixing a rum and Coke and heading over to Heather and Scott's for happy hour. He was a great dad and a great husband. Cheryl and John worked well together to provide a supportive environment in which to create a family and parent their sons. Kind and generous, whatever made Cheryl happy, made him happy. Whatever he asked, his typical answer was, sure, sure. After his cancer diagnosis and the family's move to Cleveland to support John in his cancer treatment, John was attentively looking out for Cheryl. Still, that was his job. Cheryl treasures the memory of taking ballroom dancing lessons with John. She signed him up for classes on a lark, and they had the time of their lives. Unpretentious, always willing to go along for whatever the day held in store, he once bought fishing equipment when he was invited to go fishing with a friend. Scott, it's your turn to share your memories of your dad.
My brother Joe and I were fortunate growing up for the simple fact that Dad was home all the time. From our earliest childhood memories, Dad worked from home, and he had that office downstairs off the garage, and he was home in the mornings when we woke up, and he was home after school when we got home. Most mornings, he would wake us up before school. He'd make our breakfast. He'd even pack our lunches, and he'd see us off to school. And then when we got home later that day, he was coaching our Little League teams, our baseball teams. And if he wasn't coaching, he was at least attending our practices and attending our games, or taking us to piano lessons, or driving us to Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts. There were so many things he did because he was home so often. So many things he taught us, and so many things we learned from him over the years. He taught us how to play tennis and swim and ski and use the grill. He taught us how to throw a football. As Joe said, he used to take us on ski trips in the weekends. We'd go up to Lake Tahoe, and there was times where it would just be the three of us, Dad and Joe and me, and we'd go up to Lake Tahoe skiing. And he'd always go to Heavenly, but he'd go to Harrah's on the Nevada side so he could gamble at night. And I remember after a long day of skiing, the highlight of the trip was when Dad would give Joe and I each a roll of quarters, and he would send us to the arcade room there at Harrah's, while he could go next door into the casino and play craps. And for a little kid, being 12 years old or 13 years old, that roll of quarters felt like $100. And he didn't gamble for very long, maybe an hour or so. And I think what we learned later on in life was he played until he won enough to pay for the whole trip. And that happened several times. I remember later on in life after those ski trips, a few weeks before my 18th birthday, Dad had a felt craps board, just a roll-up felt craps board. And he and I would sit on the floor at the Troy house for a couple weeks leading up to my 18th birthday. And as soon as I turned 18, he took me to Soaring Eagle so I could go practice my craps skills there in Michigan. Later on in life, he taught me how to drive the boat at Point Lookout. And that old Chris Craft is easy to drive when it's calm and there's no wind. But when you have to bring it into the hoist and it's wavy or the waves are rough or the weather is picked up, it's a little tough because you need three hands. You need one hand for the steering wheel and one hand for the throttle, and then you need a third hand for the gear shifter. And if you don't have three hands, it makes it tough when you're bringing it in stormy weather. And so Dad taught me his trick or his technique for how he would bring in the boat. And what he would do is he'd had his left hand on the steering wheel and his right hand on the throttle, and he would slip his sandal off, and he would use the gear shifter with his foot, bringing it in and out of drive with his foot back and forth so that he could bring it in a rough weather and have control with both hands. And I remember we'd being out on the lakeside, maybe we'd be skiing and it'd be calm, and so many times we'd turn the corner around the point and come back and the weather had changed. It was stormy or it was rough waves, and I remember thinking to myself, okay, I got this. I can bring the boat in, no problem. I've done this a lot of times, and Dad's taught me over the years how to do it. But I remember bringing the boat around so many times in stormy weather and just thinking to myself, I just hope he's not standing out there watching. And I certainly hope Grandpa's not standing out there watching. And 9 times out of 10, I'd get close, and sure enough, there were the two of them, standing up there with their arms folded, watching me bring the boat in stormy weather. But I had Dad's technique, and it's been a long time since I've driven the boat. It's been at least 3 or 4 years since I've taken the boat out. But I know if I had to take it out tomorrow in stormy weather, I'd have no problem bringing it in without a scratch because of what Dad taught me when I was growing up. But it wasn't all fun and games when we were growing up. So many weekends, because Dad was home, he'd put Joe and I to work. If we weren't in the yard mowing lawns, we were using the weed whacker, or we were chopping wood or fixing a fence, or even inside painting. We were always doing chores around the house. In hindsight, those were valuable lessons, but at the time it certainly didn't feel like it. But he taught us how to plant a garden. He taught us how to use power tools. He taught us how to use a drill. He taught us how to mix and pour cement. I mean, he really was a teacher. He taught us so many skills growing up. I don't think I could build a house right now by myself, but I could probably do most of it because of all the things that he taught us when we were growing up. I mean, he was a teacher. He was loving and thoughtful and kind and just so generous. They say you can learn a lot about a person by playing a round of golf with them. And if you played a round of golf with Dad, you'd realize 2 things. First is he just loved golf. And the second thing is he would play golf with anybody. And I remember the last round of golf I ever played with him at Jupiter Hills. He invited his friend Bud to play with us. And Bud was older than Dad, and Bud wasn't as good at golf as he used to be, and he didn't hit the ball as far as he used to. And I remember he pulled me aside during the round, and he said, I'm not as good as I used to be, and I don't get so many invites anymore, but your dad calls me all the time to come play. And Bud was so appreciative. And that was Dad. He didn't care how good you were, or how bad you were, or how old or how young you were. He just loved being on the golf course with his friends. It wasn't just Bud who had kind things to say. We got about 100 sympathy cards after Dad passed, and everybody who had sent a card had their own unique story, or their own unique memory, or their own unique kind words to say about Dad. But the theme in all the cards was the same. It was that Dad was a big guy with a bigger smile and an even bigger heart. And that's how we'll always remember him.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing your stories and all the lessons you learned from your dad and life shared with your dad. The Korths faced cancer, the biggest challenge of their lives, together, united in purpose and in loving care for one another. John's battle, indeed his family's battle, with cancer ended on January 31st, 2021, in a Florida hospital surrounded by his family. He leaves a remarkable legacy of love and family and friendship. Scott referred to all the cards that they received. So many cards and expressions of love and sympathy since John's death. They have come to understand that their beloved husband, father, and father-in-law was not just liked and enjoyed. He was deeply, deeply loved by many friends across the United States. He was preceded in death by his parents, Howard and Geraldine Korth, and his brother, Tim Korth. He is survived by his wife of 48 years, Cheryl, his son, Scott Korth, and daughter-in-law, Heather Nix, and his son, Joe Korth, and his partner, Joseph Dugan. He's also survived by his sister and brother-in-law, Barbara and George Hegarty, and brother and sister-in-law, Eric and Susie Korth. John's urn is going home today with his family to stay in their loving embrace a while longer. I invite you to draw John close to your hearts while I say these words on behalf of everyone who knew and loved him. John Allen Korth, we thank you for every day spent enjoying the exquisite pleasure of your company, your humanity, and your personality. Thank you for every role you played so well in the world: brother, brother-in-law, uncle, husband, father, and father-in-law, neighbor, golf and tennis partner, co-worker, and through it all, good friend to every single one of us. You made us laugh, you brought us together, you shared great adventures with us, and you walked beside us in hard times. Thanks for everything we did together: sailing and swimming in Saginaw Bay, playing tennis and golf, skiing, going to the ball game, cooking breakfast for your sons, teaching us how to garden, and learning how to dance with us. Thanks for being a friend and sibling, a husband and father who loved us with every beat of your heart, and let us genuinely and authentically be ourselves. Your love and acceptance means the world to us. Thank you for the conversations we shared and the good times we had together in the neighborhood, on the golf course, tennis court, in the swimming pool, and in our homes and backyards. You set a wonderful example of acceptance and tolerance and showed us how to welcome perfect strangers as well as beloved friends. You spent a lifetime laughing with us, loving us. We will cherish the memories and continue to tell your stories and our own stories about life with you. We remember, too, your courage and perseverance in the face of adversity. Your love for others always came shining through. If death be of any value, it is to teach us that life passes too quickly by and that we matter to so many people. We are connected by bonds of love, shared life experiences, and hope for the future. John, you taught us so much about caring for others and about getting up each day to live a caring, generous life with family and friends and anyone you met along the way. Blessed be this moment of transition and letting go. Blessed be the sacred act. You live on in the hearts of everyone you loved and laughed with while you were here. We remember you, celebrate you, and miss you always. We carry your love, your lessons with us forever to support us and guide us in the living of our days. We love you, John. Don't think about it. Just go have fun. We continue with the familiar and cherished words of the 23rd Psalm as a blessing and a reminder that we are not alone in this season in the shadow of the valley of death. I invite Cheryl's niece, Mandy, to share the reading.
The 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you, Mandy. And thank you to each of you for joining us today to honor John and his life. I encourage you to hold one another gently in your thoughts and to stay in touch in the coming weeks and months. That's how we support each other when we've lost an important, treasured member of our family and community. He cherished every relationship with you. His family was his joy. His marriage, his relationships with Cheryl and Scott and Heather, Joe and Joseph, his greatest accomplishment and his greatest source of pride. While we can never fully address the breadth and profound depth of emotions at a time like this, we've come today to tend to our own hearts and our own self-care. We accept that all is well, that John is at peace, and yet there's an empty place at the table and a hole in every heart. We heal, we remember, we carry on the legacies of those we love and lose when we speak their names as part of our daily conversations. So may John's name always be part of your memory, your living, your thinking, your conversations, and certainly your laughter, just as it has always been. That is how we mourn and heal and return to our lives, changed by this experience. Let love and compassion and forgiveness for yourself, for one another, for the challenges of the past year and the challenges of this time sustain and heal you as you move forward. May we preserve John's memory so that it has purpose. May we preserve John's memory so that it will be a blessing in our lives. We speak so often of the legacies our dear ones leave to guide us when they die. I suggest that relationships and legacies are reciprocal. I believe that John had treasured memories of intimate moments spent with you to comfort him on his way, the legacies you created in his life. I believe he knew how much you loved him, and I hope that your beautiful memories will bring you peace and comfort too. We have one more song this morning, Amazing Grace. May the words of the third verse, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. May those words bring you solace and comfort in the coming days. We close our service today with a beautiful video that was put together by John's family. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm honored to have spent this time with you, and I wish you a pleasant day.